there's somebody different from the Climate Psychology Alliance every night. And so those videos will be made available to you all as well. So everyone is slightly different. There's some different groups, so hopefully you'll get a lot of value from it all. So yeah, go ahead, Wendy.
Right. Hello, everybody. Looking at you there, I'm feeling particularly frustrated that I'm not actually physically there, which would be so different. My apologies for that. I'm in Hebden Bridge, only 30 miles away, but hey. Good to see you. And I know this is your first meeting, so we've kind of tried to make it so that it can be quite interactive and not monopolized by me, but I'll start with a brief introduction, and then we're going to get you doing a 5-minute partner bit of work. Okay, my name's Wendy. I'm a retired professor of psychology, and I used to work at the Open University before I retired. And I was kind of getting more and more worried listening to the news a lot and keeping in touch about climate change and the inaction and the kind of avoidances that seem to be people's only responses. And it was a great relief when I discovered Climate Psychology Alliance, because in my retirement in particular, it was something that I could really give my time and energy to, and feel with quite a lot of relief that instead of just worrying, I was doing my bit, you know, something that I could help to do. And so I'm gonna talk about what climate psychology is through saying a bit about what Climate Psychology Alliance does. But if you go in and look at the website, which is completely free access, it's full of resources, and that'll give you a much better impression than I can as to what Climate Psychology Alliance does and why it's doing it and why it's psychology. I'll just say a tiny bit about why psychology. I mean, if we just listen to the news on climate change, we tend to prone to think, well, scientists know what the problem is. We've got to reduce our carbon footprint, and it's now code red. This is this week's news. I mean, just more people are recognizing its intense seriousness than ever before. But as if, okay, we'll put in place the technical solutions. Science knows what to do, and we can turn this around. But science has known what to do for 30 years, and it hasn't happened. And there hasn't been a place for psychology in this at all. And where there has, it's been kind of very individualist. You know, how are people changing their behaviors? Are they, with the implication underneath, are they doing enough? As if individuals bear responsibility for turning this around. So even though I'm talking about a climate psychology, it is not about individuals bearing the responsibility, which of course doesn't mean to say that individuals can't do quite a lot to help and find their own place in all of this. So, I mean, I suppose the most important thing about climate psychology as an organization is that we recognize that support for the enormous kind of emotional difficulties that come with recognizing the climate reality, the urgency and catastrophic nature of it, that support isn't there. And we want to offer it at a community level. And we don't want it to be just restricted to individuals who can afford to go to a therapist. And anyway, that makes it sound as if the individuals who can't bear the reality are kind of needing mental health support. And one of the main things that we go on about in Climate Psychology Alliance is that to face the reality and be anxious and feel a lot of emotions about it is a sign of really healthy mental state, because if you can't face that reality, that's the pathology. To face it and to feel worried about it is to face the truth. And Climate Psychology Alliance is motto, you know, strapline that you'll find right at the top of the website is Facing Difficult Truths. And a lot of its work has been about just how hard it is to face a truth as big as this one, which is an existential crisis for humanity. There's been nothing like it in history, no models. And we offer support to individuals, nonetheless, free support if people can't afford it, 3 free sessions for anyone, you just have to go in and find it. Also, tips and ways things to read about, for example, the worry for a huge number of parents about how they talk to children about it when children are hearing about it at school. There's also a lot of group support amongst us so that we feel just contained within a group that recognizes that things are like we think they are, rather than thinking we're mad to be feeling like this. Workshops, trainings, a writing digest every month, books, reviews, podcasts. Anyway, have a look. But ultimately, I think climate psychology is to say, science can't solve this as if it's an intellectual, technical problem. Science has been failing to do that on its own. And there is a psychology involved in how we actually face this reality and what we do as a result of that. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And the best way in to talk about it like that is actually how you who've chosen to come tonight and register for the next few weeks, how you face what's been plastered across the news this week. You can hardly have missed it. And so now we're going to go into a very short exercise so that you can begin to tune into that. Most of the time in our lives, we just cope by getting on with what we have to do every day and not thinking about it. But obviously, you've come here tonight because this is what we're thinking about here, what you've chosen to. So since the publication of the IPCC report, it's been everywhere on the news, which is not what used to be the case when it was avoided. So I'm asking you 3 questions, and Bob can write them on the flip chart, but as well. But when I've said them, I want you to just turn to the person you're closest to, turn to who you're sitting next to, and share 5 minutes time thinking about your answers to them. And then we'll put those responses down. And I'm going to spend my time, the time I've got, maybe just half an hour at the most, to try and address what you say, rather than coming in from some outside angle. So here we are. Here are my questions. When you're confronted with news like this week, how have you been feeling faced with that? How have you been feeling? Secondly, to make it a bit specific, what do you feel worst about? And thirdly, is there anything that's helped you with those feelings? Those are the 3 questions. And I don't want to cast what you're going to talk now about so much as answers as your responses to those. So anything that crosses your mind, your associations to those, events from the last few days, the thing that's on topmost in your feelings in response to those is what would be very valuable to hear. Okay, turn to the person next to you. You've got 5 minutes. I make it 11 minutes past 7 now, and just share it out 2.5 minutes each. Okay, off you go.
The questions are here.
And then
Right. Well, we've had just over 5 minutes. Gosh, that went fast. Bob,
Yeah.
are you going to collect those responses? And I'll probably not hear them, so you'll have to read them out to me and everybody else when they're in. Is that all right?
Okay, so we managed to scribble a few down, or was it more? A few people have scribbled some down, but most have talked. So
right. So just go round and everybody say what's come up really for them. As I say, they don't have to be direct questions, answers to the questions. It can be what comes up for you.
So the only issue is that Wendy might not be able to hear you from back there. So it might be you have to come to the monitor, which is a bit weird, I know. But we'll see how, should we test it?
Okay. So with this new news that came out, I kind of felt two things. The first was a relief that mainstream media and platforms that people who are not searching out the information, but people who are just watching television at night, they're going to be told this information.
So I'm afraid I couldn't catch very much of that at all. So maybe Bob can relay it.
Unless, are you okay to come to the monitor? Or I can do if you like, but it's just, I'm just conscious of time as well as all.
Yeah, no, we'll have to try and cut it into short into, you know, a brief sentence or so, and I'll pick it up as a theme. You can take your mask off maybe just for a moment now, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So first was like a big relief that everyone was starting to talk about it, and that people who are not necessarily looking for the information aren't getting the information. But then I was nervous because I know in the United States, and I kind of think maybe elsewhere, we have a really good emergency response where we get really excited and we want to fix everything right away. But then you give us long-term goals that last longer than a year, and we tend to lose our
Wendy, are you still there, buddy? It was going so well, wasn't it? We're still on Wi-Fi. It might be at that end. No, spotted. You doing something there? He's gone. Very sorry about that, but we should be back with us in a moment or so. Hello, Wendy. Well, I wasn't expecting that.
I mean, it doesn't happen. You know, this is really, I don't know what's going on. What I suggest you do is carry on collecting the themes and write them down. And hopefully I can either, it'll come back on, or I'll find a fuse box somewhere but it's on, because it's not just broadband, it's everything.
Do you have FaceTime capabilities on your phone? Is it an Apple phone?
It's an Apple phone. Obviously, WhatsApp is cut as well. Would FaceTime not rely on?
Yeah, no, it'd have to come from roaming. How many G's you got?
Oh, I don't mind about that. I use those just like I'm talking to you now. But is FaceTime something that can come from roaming?
Yeah, so it's just if you've got 4G though. If you've got 3G, it's not going to work.
I don't have 4G here.
Probably not then. Okay, let's see how we do. And yeah, we'll hopefully.
Terribly sorry, but you've got 5 minutes to collect those, and then you might have to facilitate the discussion without me, which I know is exactly not what we had in mind. But there's absolutely not a peep from anything in the house at the moment.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute, it's just come. It's come back on.
Hey.
No, it just gives the broadband a minute, but at least it's got power.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Something's come back on. Collect them. I'll be with you in 2 minutes.
Okay, mate.
And you'll just have to get back into my Zoom probably because it's been cut.
Yeah, we're on it. So just let me know like the Zoom window is still open. So if you can rejoin, then great. If not, then set up a new one and put it open.
Right.
Okay, see you in a second, hopefully.
Yeah.
Oh, don't you just love it? Okay, so yeah, I mean, we can't sort of start collecting responses and posts, which is amazing. So there's the 3 questions, isn't there? How have you been feeling? Which are things that we touched on earlier, but if you want to try and put some more words to these feelings that we are experiencing, and perhaps try and identify one thing that we feel the worst about. And then the third one is just been like, what's been helping you? Is there anything that's been helping you along? So I was hearing some really good stuff from us all, from a lot of them, about kind of coping mechanisms and ways that we are helping to keep positive about it. So I was thinking, wow, this week is on it. We've got loads of these different sorts of methods that they can use to steer themselves through that roller coaster of emotions that comes with the climate emergency. So yeah, those are our 3 things. How have you been feeling? What do you feel the worst about? And what has been helping you? They are written on this. I can pop it up. Not sure where.
Yes, yes.
I feel like if this didn't happen, though, it wouldn't be a real meeting with technology.
No, never. It's really good that they can be on board. Because it is just for an hour. When you don't have far away. On Monday, it was the Wi-Fi on the library. And then yesterday, so I did it through Michael, the options to record it. And then went now, so they have to go back and everything. Yeah, I wasn't expecting this house.
Yeah, we don't run on the other side.
You managed to scribble anything down there? Or in the yeah.
Right. If anything changes as well.
Probably just for another month.
Know whether to go to journal to make
I'll probably do some teaching, but can't really do a part-time job. I can't not hear like maybe 6 hours. Yeah, I have a textile background, so my I'm creating a yarn that looks as
Hi.
Do you want to or two more, or should we start? Do you want feedback?
Hi, Bob, I'm back.
Right.
Well, fancy that. I am so sorry.
Fancy that. No worries. No worries. Yeah, definitely wasn't expecting that one.
So
okay.
how about you read out the themes and I'll note them, and then I'll just pitch straight in because we've only got half an hour now.
Okay, so we have one. Would you like to start with question 1 first? That makes sense, right?
No, just no, give me the whole lot because I'm going to have to group them.
Okay. So we have feeling overwhelmed and conscious of. I need me read this. Just give me a second. My eyes. Okay. Conscious of intake, help to stay informed but limit intake of news, etc.
Did you say conscious of intake?
Intake, yeah. Yeah.
How much you can,
intake
how much
of
you can take
information.
in?
Yeah.
I've got it. Go on.
And then things that have helped, talking to a friend, but not much helped. Nerves, anxiety towards the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so next is believe people were hearing about it, especially those who may not seek this info out.
Right.
Nervous because we have great emergency response, but lose track of the goals, become bored, upset that there is no immediate responses. So that's what Samantha was saying to you before we got cut off, I think. And so, yeah, so the number 3 to that one is knowing that it is not only on the shoulders of individuals, but bureaucrats, thank you, yeah, are also working on it. They are much better at long-term goals.
Right. Okay.
So we have some general thoughts. Hopeless, we're messing things up. We can have an impact on others. There is more awareness.
Yeah.
It's difficult to navigate, conflicted between doing the right thing or the easier thing, consuming ethically, competing priorities.
Right.
Not knowing how to be heard, what processes are in place. How can we help others to participate, be heard, and take actions?
Right. Okay.
Stop there for a bit, or shall I keep going?
Yeah. Well, if nobody's been left out, that's plenty to go on.
Yeah.
You can please feel free to chip in. Oh, you've got something else there.
Oh, there's plenty more. Yeah.
All right.
How long have we got again? Okay, so overwhelmed, but also worried that climate. Climate what? Climate reporting will go back to usual after a couple of weeks. Social media, especially Twitter, makes me feel helpless about the state of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I consciously chose to avoid it this week.
Yeah.
In terms of the climate crisis, I feel angry about the multiple injustices exacerbated by climate change. The people who have contributed the least to climate change are feeling feeling the worst. Yeah, the worst effects. Joining a community has been my way to cope with all my big emotions. I also talk about it with friends and family, which makes me less isolated and has been helpful. Great.
Yeah. Okay.
Just 2 more, Wendy.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. So number 1, over it. Some have known how bad it is for years. I'm glad it's there.
Right.
Feel worst about those that have been experiencing climate change for years. That's number 2. Number 3, talking to anyone and everyone and thinking about what I am doing and what I can do. Like this.
Yeah. Right.
Last one, Wendy. Nobody's left out, right? Sad, lucky, could work out what we are doing. Hopelessness, but also anger at the businesses, and the worst are not acting sooner.
Yeah.
And yeah, so number 3 is being responsible, taking action and speaking with loved ones. That's
right. Okay, we've got the
thank you everyone.
The deep and wide range there. Thank you, everybody. And the first thing that strikes me about it as a whole package is that this is not just climate anxiety. There's a huge range of emotions already, a lot of them difficult, although not quite all. And so let me just first talk about that business of the place that emotions have in our ability, first of all, to go on with productive and hopefully happy lives while all this is happening around us. And secondly, to work out how it helps us to take actions that are possible and relevant and right for us. Because there's been a lot of talk in that collection of responses about action, and also about talking to other people and joining with them and community. And it's kind of well known that feeling that you can do something is a very important sort of psychological support, as well as obviously being very important for the outcome. But there's also relief in there too. And I remember feeling that when I first started reading stuff that was honest, rather than avoiding stuff about climate change, which wasn't so many years ago, and feeling a relief that somebody or somewhere there was honesty about it, and it was something to hang on to. And I think what we're getting now is honesty, and I can really welcome those of you who feel relieved that the cat's out of the bag, sort of thing. And I'll just go back to that previous point I made, which is so central to what Climate Psychology Alliance does under this headline, Facing Difficult Truths, is that if we can face this in a realistic way and still carry on with our lives, then, you know, that is tremendously healthy. And we'll all be avoidant at times. And somebody said they'd taken the explicit conscious decision to avoid the news this week. And I noticed myself doing that on a number of occasions this week too. And I think that it's very important to recognize that as well as facing the reality of it, we all need time out. You know, we all need moments when we don't have to think about it, so that it doesn't become the kind of like a kind of, you know, desperate or paranoid sort of, you know, lead just bearing down on us all the time, on our lives, so that we can hardly breathe. And that reminds me of another emotion, which is guilt. Because once we recognize how urgent and how serious it is, there's a very strong feeling that, okay, so what can we do? We absolutely can't permit ourselves to do nothing about this any longer. Now we know. And there's a little knot of difficult things in there, which I think it's quite important to sort of untie and loosen up, because we can get completely drowned in guilt, and we can become overwhelmed because we don't know how to act, because nothing seems enough, and we can feel guilty about anything that doesn't solve this problem, as if we could solve it as individuals. And I think it's really important to, well, first of all, let me give you a bit of a political perspective that I find helpful on it. One of the things that our society has done, because it's so individualistic, is to always talk about solutions to this as if individual changes in behavior were the answer. And that's the kind of climate psychology that I am partly here to disagree with. And because that just makes us feel guilty, because, and here comes the overwhelm, there's no way that we can do everything right. There's no way that we can go into a shop and not end up buying single-use plastic. Even if we stop driving a car, which is very hard for us given the way society is structured. It's not as if we're stopping, we don't have any carbon footprint at all. What about heating our homes? We can't afford fancy boilers, you know, all of those things constantly. This is talking personally as well, feeling that I can never do enough, and that I can't even live my life without, you know, without over consuming, but whatever I do is kind of too much carbon footprint. And it can really bear down and limit one. And so I think it's really important to reject that guilt. And one way we can reject it politically is that it is absolutely unacceptable that people in power, corporations, governments, and world leaders have actually handed this problem down as if it could be solved at individual level. I think it's a real indictment of the individualism of our society that they've done it and they've got away with it, as if not filling our kettles full is going to solve this huge problem. I mean, I'd say, just to talk at the big scale politics, even if our carbon footprint as a world was reduced to 0 this year, I don't think that would solve the climate and biodiversity and species loss crises, which are all one and the same big crisis, because ecological stability has been lost from the world now. And it makes me hugely angry, and angry can be really quite a positive, you know, useful emotion if you feel it. So don't feel bad about that. But it makes me hugely angry that people have been expected to, you know, individuals bear the burden of this for so long. And of course, behind that, the denial, the avoidance, the lies, the hypocrisy of the fossil fuel companies and all the big, you know, so anger, fine. Anger's part, I think, of climate psychology. And I think for me, the rejection of my guilty feelings is a work in progress. And sometimes I feel that it'll be something that I'm always having to work on, that I will never be guilt-free about my carbon footprint in the world, you know, living a Western lifestyle, basically. I mean, this is how we live because we don't have the choices. And again, as individuals, let's shed some of that burden and say, it's not at that level that this problem will be solved. So I hope that that might help you a bit with your feelings of overwhelm. To talk directly about the overwhelm, and this is something else I feel most days maybe, and because of the work I do, I listen to the news and I read all the worst climate news almost every day. And I have to let in the thought that we're not going to be able to turn this around in time. I mean, the kind of the way that the experts talk about it, however bad it gets, they always say, but there's still time if we act. And they've been saying that for so long that it's hard to believe them. And when they say it, I feel cynical. And it's very easy to kind of, you know, lose that radical hope that we need to say, okay, that something can be, you know, rescued out of all of this. But the feeling that I can't do anything about it solely as an individual, I actually end up feeling a little bit relieved about, because it gives me space to carry on living a meaningful life. And if that means, for example, I've just taken 6 months time out to look after my new baby grandson, and not really, I've hardly done any of this work. I stopped listening to the news. And it was just like looking after this precious new life, you know, knowing that the world was not going to be a good one while he's growing up and an adult. And I actually felt that I was doing a really precious thing. And of all the things I feel guilty about in relation to climate change, that was not one of them, which was nice and a relief. That brings me on to the question of generational injustices, and more generally the injustices, you know, who's caused this and who's going to suffer. And I've been very, very conscious of the generational thing, becoming a grandmother for the first time this year, and at my age. And I'm just that age where I was born in 1949, which was the beginning of the so-called Great Acceleration period after the war, when population of the world kind of has tripled. Everything's tripled in that time. And it's only really during my lifetime, you know, the last 70 years or so, that we have started plundering this earth to the point where we're using 1.7 worths of Earth's resources every year. You know, and obviously it's not sustainable. And that is wider than the carbon crisis, than the fossil fuel crisis. And my generation has been there presiding over that. And the idea of progress and consumption and fast travel and global travel and going anywhere you want in the world and buying lots of things and living in houses 10 times bigger than you need. I mean, just all these things which have been like consumption, they've all happened in my lifetime. And on the one hand, I feel responsible for that. I know it mustn't go on. And I also feel that when that turns around, it can't be a bad thing, because there's something about human consumption which is just kind of overridden an ethical relationship to the natural world, and that we have to contract our activities as human beings, and in fact translate ourselves into different kind of species. And that brings me on to another bit about climate psychology, which I'm interested in, which is that ourselves, the way we are as people, has been formed in this period of the great acceleration, when progress, modernization, consumption, and rape of the earth, quite frankly, has got worse. And that can turn around, and there is an opportunity in there to be transformative, to have a different relationship to nature, to stop plundering it, to stop species things. And actually some of that's showing, like in the pandemic times, and that gives me some relief. It's like finding a little gem of opportunity in what is a frightening picture of collapse, a certain amount of collapse. So I don't know whether that will help some people feel that there are things to be done that they can do, or make them feel worse. But this thing about, if you feel bad about it, feelings are, for me and for CPA, the starting point. Because if we just treat it as an intellectual problem, everybody will just go on treating it like they have done for the last 50 years, which is to pretend that we can carry on as before when we can't. And more people are recognizing that, which, as somebody said right at the beginning, more than one person said, is actually a huge relief. Let me talk a little bit, because we haven't got much time, about what helps with these feelings. So people have said talking to anyone and everyone, and joining a community, and action. A lot of people mentioning action. The talk that Bob is going to send out to you all, which is by a colleague of mine in CPA, and I listened to today as well. She talks about external action and internal action in quite a helpful way, and the idea that we can just go out and be activists. The external action bit is only part of it. And the internal action is about how we actually look after ourselves and our feelings within our families and communities, and how we help ourselves and others to face this, not avoid it, not tell ourselves lies about it, but also not frighten people. And people mention their families quite a lot. And actually the possibility of talking about it honestly, without kind of, I don't know, without kind of frightening people almost on purpose. It's quite a difficult skill, and it's one that we do quite a lot of in workshops and climate cafes and everything. And there's a good podcast and also tips about how to talk to children about it. Children who come home from school saying, you know, the teacher said today that such and such, and it was frightening, and like how to be honest. Because if you're just reassuring, I mean, it seems to me that for the last 10 years or 20 or 30 years, since climate change has actually been there to know about, is that people have given us false reassurances. Even the people who meant well. And there's something about being honest and not making it unbearable, which I think the therapeutic support that climate psychology can give is accessible to everybody, and we can learn, whether it's talking to children or to friends. And partly it's about modeling the bearability to say these things and not freaking out at the same time as saying them, to hear the authentic recognition in somebody's voice and know that you're not alone, and for them to know that they're not alone. So I imagine from what you've said about what you get relief from, that some of you can do that with at least some people, you know, friends and family. There's this psychological term called containment, which is actually about a psychological containment of very difficult to bear emotions, and that we can sort of build that containment in at various levels in our lives. And of course, action helps, but this is internal action. This is helping us bear it, and, you know, doing things that help calm us down when we just feel overwhelmed, like sitting down and meditating for half an hour. I know time makes that difficult, or going out for a walk in the park and realizing that the trees, even though they're threatened, are actually going on living and breathing and growing. And today is all right, whatever today is. We can live and love today and not worry about tomorrow. I've found a concentration on now, which I didn't have for decades, is actually a wonderful salve. And you know, people find that solace in different places. So, some kind of spiritual solace. There are so many different places to find it. Okay, there's so much I haven't said from this list. One of the things was about social injustices. You know, the people who've got us into this mess are not the people who are going to suffer. And I think that anger can be quite helpful to mobilize us, as long as we, it doesn't turn into hate, and therefore it would be, you know, quite destructive. I must stop because I could go on, and we've only got 5 minutes until you're going to be booted out. So how do you want to use those? Do you want to just come back with stuff that's still sort of on top of your mind and you don't want to have to take away with you and hold for another week until you come back? How about a round of for that purpose? What do you think, Bob? Yeah.
So we've just been told by the man who's looking after the building tonight, who's very kindly let us stay for longer if we want to. So if there is other things, and if everybody's happy to stay for a little bit longer, then you can probably expand on another couple of things if you like.
Oh, that's very kind of him.
Very kind.
Thank him. How long is he giving us, Bob?
As long as we want. So
Wow.
is everyone all right till about midnight? Or...
Wow.
So yeah, it's kind of let's see what.
Great. Okay. Well, if I stop now, that's wonderful, because there's actually time for you lot to say whatever it is that you would like to say. If you want me to respond, I will do my best to answer anything you want to comment on. Not answer, but, you know, open my mind to and talk about whatever you want. If you want to pass it amongst yourselves, that's fine too, because I know you haven't had much chance to get to know each other at all yet. Who's going to start?
Thank you, Fatima. it's quite daunting, isn't it? It's a bit, especially when there's been so much to take in tonight already. And this as well. But,
Hi.
um,
Can you shout because of
or-
the distance from the microphone?
do you want to come close to the, or I can
Or come closer, yeah. If you don't mind.
yeah, or just kneel down. Or,
So
Hi.
I feel like the thing that you mentioned about thinking of like taking on the burden as an individual and feeling like really guilty made me think about how the way that I saw it as when I was younger, we learn about it in school, and I was mentioning it before that I didn't really like think about it too much. I would just sort of push it away and not really take it seriously, I think. But then because I would just think that it is the corporation's responsibility, and I just thought like really hopeless and like I couldn't really do anything. So I like once I started like I think earning my own money and like feeling like I can put my wealth to things that I value, I felt like I can make a difference in that way. But then I didn't really think that I think I felt a bit guilty from beforehand, being like on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, where I know about the climate emergency and not really acting in any way. I guess I was younger, so I wouldn't really be able to do much, and I felt hopeless. But then I think what I'm trying to get at is just when I see it as like from an individual's perspective and just the part where you're like really fearing it, for me that was my switch to just do something. And I think it's better than nothing. And I don't know if like finding that balance between it's not my problem at all to I can do something, and you know, even if the corporations aren't doing anything and I do live under capitalism, and thinking in that cynical way is not going to help, and I should just do like what I can.
Yeah, that sounds, I love that phrase, finding a balance, and not letting yourself get worked up too much about all the things that quite honestly nobody you know is going to be able to change. And that sounds pretty right for you, you know, if you find that balance. Now, in my experience, that balance is never perfectly stable. And so one of the things I've had to get used to is that my feelings about how okay my behavior is in relation to climate change kind of goes up and down, and I'm thinking, oh, you know, I must do such and such, and this isn't enough, and how could I possibly still be doing whatever, you know. And then when I find more peace in a day, by, I don't know, starting off with a meditation or going for a walk or something like that, I find that eases out, so that there is an extent to which I can help cultivate my own balance by my internal action. And so remember, I made that distinction between external action and internal action. I think part of the internal action is self-care, and not feeling that there's something not good enough about giving attention to ourselves when the world is ablaze, you know, which would be self-punishing and pointless and not valid, you know, because we're here on this earth to create value, and part of that is just to carry on loving, you know, the people around us, and being, I don't know, you know, a good community member, but not doing things we don't need to do, climate wise. So yeah, that sounds, I can quite, you know, the track you're on, it's like a journey, isn't it? And good for you. So does that Does that respond, do you think, to what you're conveying to us all? Is there any other bit that was more that you wanted to kind of put out there and say, this is difficult?
I think that's it, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else want to say anything to Wendy? Any other reactions? Yeah, we do just have tonight with Wendy, and so we'll be moving on to other things over the coming weeks. But there are obviously opportunities to contact the Climate Psychology Alliance and have these kinds of conversations, which are, of course, not normal conversations for us to have in a day-to-day, and so it can be quite difficult to, as we were saying before, translate all of these emotions that are intrinsically linked with the climate emergency and actually put them into words. But yeah, I mean, if anybody has any other thoughts or comments or anything they'd like to share, then yeah, thank you. Great.
It's only going to be brief.
No, that's fine. Well, yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Hi, that's good. I can hear you.
I just wanted to say thank you. As I was listening to you and how you were saying how you feel and behave and forgive yourself and putting things into context, it really helped me. So that's all I wanted to say. So thank you for sharing your thoughts, and it made me feel a lot better.
Oh, how nice. Thank you so much for that. That's, yeah, I mean, it's a lovely example of kind of how we can contain it together, you know, and yeah, and do that with a community that you can create around you. And I'll come back to something else. That's all right. Anyone, somebody else? Well, I'll just something else on that. I mean, there are various levels of support that you can create or find on the Climate Psychology Alliance website. But, you know, there is this possibility if you feel quite overwhelmed, or indeed it doesn't have to be overwhelmed, you can actually ask for 3 free sessions with somebody who's qualified to, you know, psychotherapist. And you just have to find that on the website. And so if there is a moment, even if it's not now, in the future where it feels as if you need to untangle some really quite negative stuff that's, you know, that's making it hard for you, then that's a very practical resource that we offer. It's worth knowing about and having in the background. Yeah, in my experience, you know, when we pay attention to the internal action as well, we can stop beating ourselves up about this and mean that we can actually feel joy, even at the same time as we feel grief.
Thank you, Carla.
Is that I'm thinking that there is something that you don't see me. There's something that we haven't mentioned, and is this when we realize what's going on, we sometimes we confront people in a way that is uncomfortable. So it's not, is from the ego, and this can mean that we are feeling overwhelmed, but how we express it is uncomfortable. We try to educate people around us.
Yes.
And we stop understanding them or trying to understand them.
Yes.
And maybe we don't see our flaws, and we're not perfect. So this is important as well.
Yeah. Are you talking about having conversations with people who are, you know, difficult to talk to about this, or avoiding things, or where there's potential conflict, or just conversations where people are already like-minded?
I don't know, I was not thinking about the other people, but about ourselves, about how we manage this.
Yeah.
And when we understand something, and instead of dealing with it ourselves, we try to change the other people's behaviors,
Yes.
without understanding that maybe they are not in this moment, or maybe their priorities are in another place.
I get what you're saying. Do you know, I think that's such an important point to bring up, because I think when we are feeling that it's so hard to do the right thing, in psychodynamic terms, we can kind of push out the blame onto the other people who we can blame for doing it even worse than us, to make ourselves feel morally, you know, comfortable with ourselves. And it's quite difficult to talk to people who are really behaving badly in carbon terms without, and really feel compassion for everybody, despite how they are treating the ecology of the world. And yet, I think what you're saying is that somehow we have to not create enemies and others of all the other people who are in the world having difficulty with this, however badly we feel they might be behaving. Maybe that's the bit that I've added. And it's just so hard to do. And I think it's so important to bring that up, that kind of none of us, it's like that sort of Christian idea, let he who is without fault cast the first stone. You know, nobody is without fault here. And it means that we can foster something that's not, and you know, built on enemies and conflict, but actually on compassion and generosity. And I think in the communities that are going to be developing, you know, as things get really quite tough, you know, when it won't be business as usual, it'll be terribly important to hold on to that and not create an us and them. Yeah. Even the big business, even the corporations that have been lying to us. I mean, I can get off on rage and hate, but you know, it's harder to feel any sympathy.
They have their own reasons, and I'm not saying if they are valid or not, but Google, for example, is evil in many things, but it has ecological data centers. So there are some things, and if we say that something is evil, then it's very difficult. It's what you were saying about having a very big problem instead of having like hills. You could say. Yeah. So it's this. If we say, okay, you're doing this, I don't like how you're doing this, and I think you can do this in this other way, instead of saying, everything's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a wonderful reminder to us all, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else would like to say something?
How are we feeling? Are we feeling like we've done quite a lot for tonight as it is, and there's been a lot sort of taken perhaps and process?
Oh, somebody said something that I wanted to come back to. How much can you take in? You know, intake. And then I got it, and I thought, yeah. And I edit a climate digest for the CPA website every month. And that word digest, I've chosen very particularly because it's like there's so much information flooding in. And my model of psychology, from psychoanalysis, is that actually we don't just take in information and get it, we have to digest it, just like we have to digest food. And the digestion of climate information, which is so hard to think, so very painful, in fact, unprecedented in human, history. The digestion of that is very, very difficult indeed. And it takes time, and we should really, one of the ways we can look after ourselves is to only take in as much as we can bear and find ways to let it sink in, particularly maybe talking it through with somebody, or having a group, or I don't know, getting a very good sleep or going for a walk, so that it has time to percolate through. Because otherwise, for example, because I read the kind of bad news every day, because I'm editor of this digest and what have you, I find I'm skimming it over with just my cognitive faculties. Okay, that's happening, that's happening, that's happening. And that's my way of kind of taking it in, but not taking it in actually. And it's at another level where I have to take it in if I'm really going to let it transform me and upset me actually. But letting it upset me in bearable degrees is part of the issue. We have to do that, unfortunately. And then it's a question of finding safe supports and everything to help that. Those are some of the things that the workshops, and the climate cafes that you can check into and go on a virtual climate cafe where you can digest this stuff with other people. Yeah, there are quite a few of those offered. Yeah, thank you. I just can't remember what brought that up, but I think that word digesting it is very important for me. Anything else?
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for sharing all of those feelings and emotions and thoughts. Not an easy thing to do, especially I realise that this is the first session, and so we all don't know each other yet. We're just starting to get to know each other. But I felt like it was very important to have this this conversation and start this process at the first workshop as well, especially with the previous part of introducing the subject and talking about climate change as a subject. But this is something that we will be revisiting as well towards the end of the assembly as well.
And further on eco-anxiety and climate psychology, Caroline Hickman's talk, which Bob's sending out to you, it's half an hour's worth, really good. Really wide-ranging, very clear, very professional indeed. So I recommend that to you. And it'll open out more some of the things that I've only touched on tonight. So thank you for being here. I'm really sorry that all the electricity in my house went off for 10 minutes. God knows what was going on. God knows. Made me think of social collapse when it happened. Climate collapse. Hey, so I hope the rest of your sessions are very good. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Wendy. I'll just show you around the room so you can wave goodbye, everybody.
Yes, so that I can see all the way around. That's nice. Okay.
Thank you, Wendy. Speak to you again soon.
Shall I just leave? I'll just end it now from my end.
Yeah, and then we can talk about
Send the
sending the recording over, and then I can put it around the groups.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Bye, Bob.